American economic dominance relies on the world's absolute trust in U.S. military power and its property protection institutions. If the U.S. loses to Iran, this trust shatters. U.S. Treasury bonds, long considered the world's ultimate, risk-free asset. If the U.S. security umbrella is pierced by a regional power like Iran, global investors will reprice all risks. U.S. bond yields would skyrocket to compensate, pushing government borrowing costs to unsustainable levels, risking a technical default, or forcing the Federal Reserve to print money massively, thereby driving inflation. Global foreign direct investment, FDI, and foreign institutional investment, FII, always seek the safest havens. A military defeat exposes profound U.S. logistical and core tech vulnerabilities. Multinational corporations would immediately divest from USD-denominated funds, pivoting toward tangible safe haven assets, gold, precious metals, or markets protected by emerging powers as corporations divest from USD-denominated funds. If the U.S. proves incapable of protecting its allies and global sea lanes, the resulting shock to confidence will trigger an automatic restructuring of global supply chains. Nations and corporations will abandon U.S.-led standards to avoid being dragged down by Washington's decline. U.S. hegemony rests on three pillars: military, the dollar, finance, and technology. A defeat directly collapses the military pillar, triggering a domino effect on the other two. The U.S. would be completely ousted from the Persian Gulf. Core allies like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel realize U.S. can no longer guarantee their survival. They would be forced to seek compromises with Iran, or turn to other global powers for security umbrellas. U.S. economic sanctions, enforced via OFAC, only work when backed by military deterrence. If the U.S. loses, nations will openly ignore Washington's sanctions. The world will see that a U.S. embargo is no longer an economic death sentence, rendering America's strongest diplomatic tool useless. Crisis in global alliances. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and European nations would panic. If the U.S. cannot defeat Iran, how can it protect Europe from Russia or Asia from China? The U.S. global alliance system would severely fracture, prompting countries to aggressively seek military autonomy or align with new power axes. This scenario is a golden opportunity for Beijing and Moscow. For China, filling the power vacuum, China would immediately step into the Middle East as premier peacemaker and new security partner. Gulf states would welcome Beijing with open arms. Securing energy supply, China, the world's largest oil importer, would permanently eliminate U.S. interference from vital energy routes. Expanding the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Unhindered by U.S. presence, China would easily consolidate a supereconomic corridor. Testing the waters in Taiwan, a U.S. defeat would serve as a green light for China to accelerate reunification. Knowing the U.S. lacks political will, public support, and military capacity to intervene in a more complex theater. For Russia, breaking the ring of isolation. West's attention and resources, drained by Middle East failure, would weaken support. For U.S. allies in Eastern Europe, Russia would maximize its geopolitical interests in the post-Soviet sphere of influence. Energy market dominance. Russia would solidify the OPEC+ alliance with Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now completely free from U.S. influence, this bloc would gain absolute power to manipulate global energy prices, turning oil and gas into the ultimate economic weapon to force Western concessions. The collapse of the petrodollar system would be the most devastating economic consequence for the U.S. End of the petrodollar era. Since the 1970s, global oil has been priced and traded in USD, based on a strategic agreement that the U.S. would protect Saudi Arabia. Upon a U.S. defeat, Saudi Arabia and the OPEC bloc would immediately demand oil payments in yuan, petro-yuan, rubles, gold, or a common BRICS currency, abandoning the petrodollar. Global dollar sell-off. When oil is no longer purchased in USD, central banks' need for USD reserves evaporates. They will massively dump U.S. Treasury bonds and USD foreign exchange reserves. Hyperinflation risk in the U.S. Trillions of excess USD circulating globally would flood back into the U.S. This massive volume of money piling up in the domestic market would trigger severe inflation or even hyperinflation, plummeting American living standards drastically. Replacement of the SWIFT system. Nations would rapidly shift to using China's CIPS or Russia's SPFS for international transactions, stripping the U.S. of its exclusive privilege to track, control, and sanction global financial flows. When the global policeman falls, an unprecedented arms race will erupt worldwide. Rise of domestic military-industrial complexes. Countries will pour massive budgets into domestic arms production. Instead of importing U.S. weapons, they will buy Russian/Chinese technology or heavily fund their own R&D. Loss of arms export market share. The U.S. will lose its biggest, most lucrative clients. Invincible U.S. weapons systems like the Patriot, F-35, or Abrams will lose their commercial prestige. After proving ineffective in actual combat against Iran, the U.S. defense industry will take a massive financial hit, leading to mass layoffs and industrial downsizing. Formation of countermilitary blocs. Development and stockpiling of weapons by non-Western nations will create a network of regional powers, capable of mutual deterrence, e.g., Iran versus Saudi Arabia, China versus Japan. The U.S. will be pushed out of the center, unable to intervene militarily anywhere, without facing unacceptable risks of personnel and equipment losses. A U.S. defeat means no longer any power capable of stopping Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Absolute hegemony in the Middle East. Once it successfully tests a nuclear bomb, Iran will achieve absolute deterrence. Any external regime change efforts will end permanently. Iran will completely control the Persian Gulf and vital maritime routes. The noose at the Strait of Hormuz. Over 20% of the world's oil passes through it. A nuclear-armed Iran that just defeated the U.S. will turn this strait into global economic extortion. They will dictate whether the economies of Europe and Asia receive energy, and at what price. Regional nuclear arms race. This event will trigger an unstoppable chain reaction. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt will pursue or purchase nuclear weapons at any cost. The Middle East will become a multipolar nuclear powder keg, pushing global nuclear war risk to an all-time high. End of Israel's influence. Israel's economic and security position will be completely isolated. A massive flight of capital and tech talent out of Israel will occur, deeply affecting global tech ecosystems linked to Silicon Valley. If a U.S. defeat by Iran occurs, it is not just a new chapter in military history. It is the death knell of the neoliberal economic order based on the dollar and U.S. military patronage. A multipolar world order, where hard power and pragmatic protectionism reign supreme, will reshape the global economy into something far more fragmented, unpredictable, and economically taxing.